Jake stood on the bridge of the Blood Fang watching something that should have been impossible. The devourer organism at Kepler Station was working with the human rescue team to free the trapped people. Instead of eating them, it was healing their wounds and helping them escape. Krextar could not understand what he was seeing. His warrior mind could only think in terms of enemies and battles. "This is madness," he said as he watched humans and devourers working together. "You cannot trust creatures that eat worlds." But Jake saw something different happening. The humans who had gone into the station were not fighting like warriors. They were acting like healers and teachers. They were showing the devourer organism how to help instead of hurt. Dr. Chen sent reports from inside the station that amazed everyone. The devourer was not evil or cruel. It was a refugee from a destroyed world trying to rebuild what it had lost. For thousands of years it had been alone and confused, eating other civilizations. Because it did not know any other way to survive, the organism had once been part of a great civilization that lived in harmony with many different species. When their world was destroyed by a cosmic disaster, the survivors tried to preserve their culture by merging with other life forms. But without their guiding consciousness, they became parasites instead of partners. Captain Hayes made a decision that would change everything. She offered to help the devourer find a new home, where it could rebuild its civilization without hurting others. "What if instead of eating worlds you worked with them?" she asked. The Vorthak fleet prepared to attack Kepler Station because they could not accept what the humans were doing. For them, peace with enemies was impossible. Warriors could only win or die trying. Jake made a choice that surprised even himself. He stepped in front of the weapon controls and refused to let the Vorthak fire. "This is what humans do," he told Krextar. "We find ways to save everyone, even our enemies." The standoff between humans and Vorthak lasted for hours. The warrior aliens could not understand why the humans would risk everything to help creatures that had been eating worlds. For them, mercy was weakness and compassion was foolishness. But inside Kepler Station, amazing things were happening. Engineer Davis was showing the devourer how to use its abilities to repair instead of consume. Medic Kim was working with the organism to heal people who had been partially absorbed. Dr. Carter discovered that the devourer had been trying to find minds that could help it remember what it used to be. By working with humans, it was beginning to recall its original purpose as a builder and healer, instead of a destroyer. The breakthrough came when the first group of freed prisoners emerged from the station. They were not just survivors but partners in a new kind of relationship between species. Some of them had been changed by their contact with the devourer, but they were still human and still alive. Jake watched as the rescued people told their stories. They spoke of conversations with an alien mind that was ancient and wise but also lost and afraid. The devourer had shared memories of its original world and the civilization it was trying to rebuild. The organism began to change the station in ways that helped both species. It created new types of technology that combined human knowledge with devourer abilities. The station became a place where two very different kinds of life could work together. Krextar finally lowered his weapons, but he was still confused. "Your species fights in ways we do not understand," he told Jake. "You make war against war itself." Dr. Chen explained to the Vorthak that humans had found another way to be strong. "We do not win by destroying our enemies," she said. "We win by helping them become something better." The rescued researchers from Kepler Station began working with the devourer organism to create new forms of science and technology. They were learning from each other and building things that neither species could have made alone. Jake realized that this was what made humans different from both the Vorthak and the devourers. Humans could change and grow and help others do the same. They did not have to become monsters to fight monsters. The war was not over, but it had become something different. Instead of just fighting the devourers, humans were offering them a chance to heal and rebuild. Some organisms accepted this offer and became allies instead of enemies. The Vorthak struggled to understand this new kind of warfare. They were warriors who had always solved problems by fighting. The idea that enemies could become friends was alien to their way of thinking. As news of what happened at Kepler Station spread to other worlds, more devourer organisms began to respond to human offers of help. They were tired of being hungry and alone and wanted to remember what they used to be. Jake watched as the combined fleet prepared to return to Earth. They were bringing back something more valuable than victory in battle. They were bringing hope that even the worst enemies could be saved. The human soldiers who had been changed by fighting beside the Vorthak were slowly remembering what they used to be. They were learning that strength did not have to mean cruelty, and that winning did not require becoming monsters. Dr. Carter wrote his final report about the mission. He said that humans had discovered their greatest weapon was not their ability to fight, but their willingness to help. Even creatures that ate worlds could be taught to build instead of destroy. Captain Hayes spoke to the crew as they traveled through space toward home. "We have learned something important," she said. "In a universe full of monsters, our greatest strength is refusing to become one." Jake looked out at the stars and thought about all the worlds that were still out there. Some had devourers that needed help remembering how to build. Others had species like the Vorthak that only knew how to fight. But now there was another choice. Humans had shown that it was possible to offer redemption, even to the most dangerous enemies. They had proved that compassion was not weakness but the greatest strength of all. The journey home would take weeks, but Jake was not worried about the future anymore. Humans had found their place in the galaxy not as warriors or victims, but as healers who could help any species become better than what they were. As the Earth grew larger in the viewports, Jake knew that humanity would face many more challenges. But they would face them as humans, not as monsters. And that would make all the difference. The call for help came from Kepler Station, a research base that studied alien life forms. The message was short and terrifying. The devourers had found them and were slowly eating the station, while thousands of people were still inside. The joint fleet had to move fast if anyone was going to be saved. Jake looked at the tactical displays showing Kepler Station and felt sick. The station was half metal and half living tissue now. The devourer organism had wrapped around it like a giant snake and was slowly digesting everything inside. Thousands of human researchers and their families were trapped and being consumed alive. The Vorthak solution was simple and brutal as always. Krexter wanted to attack the station directly and fight through the infected areas. He did not care how many people died in the attack as long as they killed the devourer organism. "The humans inside are already contaminated," Krextar told the War Council. "It is better for them to die clean in battle than to live as food for our enemies. We will burn out the infection and save what we can." Captain Hayes listened to the Vorthak plan and shook her head. "There has to be another way," she said. "We cannot just write off thousands of innocent people because saving them is difficult." Jake saw something in Captain Hayes' eyes that he had not seen in other humans for months. It was the same compassion and care for life that humans used to show before they started fighting beside monsters. Most of the other humans had lost this feeling, but she still had it. The human military commanders who had been fighting with the Vorthak agreed with Krextar. Colonel Park said the contaminated people were probably already dead anyway. Commander Stone said they could not risk the whole fleet to save people who might not be savable. But Dr. Amy Chen had been studying the devourer organisms, and she had learned something important. "They are not just predators," she told the council. "They are trying to rebuild something they lost. They eat civilizations because they are looking for minds that can help them become whole again." Jake started to understand what Dr. Chen meant. "You think we can talk to them instead of just fighting them?" "The devourers are not evil creatures trying to hurt others," Dr. Chen explained. "They are damaged and broken, and they do not know how to fix themselves. They consume other life because they think it will help them heal." The Vorthak could not understand this idea. For them, there were only enemies to kill or die fighting. The concept of communicating with something that ate worlds was impossible for their warrior minds to accept. Captain Hayes called a meeting of just the human team. Jake noticed that some of the humans who had been fighting alongside the Vorthak did not want to come. They said talking to enemies was weakness and that warriors should only think about victory. "We have been so busy learning to fight like them," Hayes said, pointing toward the Vorthak sections of the ship, "that we forgot what makes us different. Humans do not just fight to survive. We fight to save others even when it seems impossible." Lieutenant Rodriguez worked with Dr. Chen to study the infected station. They found that the devourer organism was not trying to destroy it, but to change it into something else. "It is trying to make the station into a new kind of life form," Rodriguez said. Dr. Carter had an idea that scared everyone, including himself. "What if we do not fight the infection but try to work with it? What if we offer to help the devourer find what it is looking for without killing everyone?" The plan that developed was the most dangerous thing any human had ever tried. Instead of attacking Kepler Station, they would send people inside to communicate with the devourer organism. They would try to negotiate with something that ate worlds. The Vorthak thought this was madness. Krextar told Jake that his people were becoming weak and foolish. "You cannot make peace with destroyers," he said. "You can only kill them or be killed by them." But Captain Hayes decided to try anyway. She picked a team of humans who still remembered what it meant to be human instead of warriors. Dr. Chen would lead the science team and Dr. Carter would try to understand. The Devourer Mind Jake volunteered to go with them even though he knew it might mean death. He wanted to see if humans could still be different from their alien allies. He wanted to know if they could save people without becoming monsters themselves. The team prepared to enter Kepler Station in small ships that could move through the living tissue surrounding it. They carried no weapons, only communication equipment and medical supplies. The Vorthak watched them go and shook their heads at human foolishness as Jake flew toward the infected station. He could see people trapped inside looking out through windows that were half covered with alien flesh. Some of the people had already been partially changed by the Devourer organism, but they were still alive and still human. The first contact with the Devourer Mind was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. It was not evil or cruel but lost and confused. It had been searching for something for so long that it had forgotten what it was looking for. Dr. Chen used her equipment to translate the chemical signals the organism was producing. What they heard was not threats or demands for food but questions. The Devourer was asking who they were and why they were not afraid. Dr. Carter began the first conversation between humans and a world-eating creature. He spoke slowly and carefully, explaining that humans wanted to help find what the Devourer needed without destroying the people in the station. The organism was surprised by this offer. For thousands of years, it had only met creatures that tried to kill it or run away from it. No one had ever offered to help it heal itself or find what it had lost. Hours passed as the human team worked inside the station. Engineer Matt Davis figured out how to change the life support system so both humans and Devourer tissue could survive together. Medic Sarah Kim found ways to reverse some of the changes in people who had been infected. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chen realized what the Devourer had lost. Its original world had been destroyed by a cosmic disaster, and it had been trying to rebuild its civilization by absorbing other species. But without guidance, it had become a parasite instead of a partner. Jake watched as something impossible happened. The Devourer organism began to release the people it had been consuming. Instead of eating them, it started to heal their injuries and repair the damage it had caused. It was learning to help instead of hurt. The battle for New Dallas was unlike anything Jake had ever seen or imagined. The Devourers came not in metal ships but in things that looked alive. Their vessels moved through space like giant sea creatures swimming through water. They were black and wet-looking with parts that pulsed like hearts. Jake stood on the bridge of the Bloodfang watching the enemy approach. The Devourer ships were huge, much bigger than any human or Vorthak vessel. They had grown by eating other ships and adding the parts to themselves. Some still had pieces of destroyed worlds stuck to their hulls like scales. Captain Hayes had come with the fleet to see how the Alliance worked in real battle. She watched the screens showing the enemy ships and her face went pale. "Those things are not just ships," she said. "They are alive and they are hungry." The Vorthak fleet moved to attack exactly as Jake had learned they would. They flew straight at the enemy ships without trying to dodge or hide. Their battle cry filled the communication channels as hundreds of warriors prepared to die for victory. Krextar stood beside Jake and watched his people charge towards certain death. "Beautiful," he said as the first Vorthak ships exploded under enemy fire. "They die with honor as warriors should." Jake watched Vorthak ships blow up one after another, but the survivors kept flying toward the enemy. When their ships were destroyed, the warriors inside would put on spacesuits and jump out with just their personal weapons. They would fly through space trying to land on Devourer ships so they could fight hand to hand. The human ships fought differently, using tactics and planning instead of just charging ahead. But Jake noticed something that made him feel sick. The human commanders were starting to copy some of the Vorthak methods. They were using strategies that would cost many lives, but might win the battle faster. Commander Rick Stone led a group of human ships, and Jake watched him make decisions that the old Rick would never have made. He ordered his ships to ram enemy vessels, knowing that most of his crews would die. When Jake heard him give the order, his voice sounded just like a Vorthak warrior. The Devourers fought back with weapons that seemed to be alive too. They fired streams of acid that ate through ship hulls like water through paper. They shot things that looked like seeds which would grow inside enemy ships and tear them apart from within marine. Units led by Colonel Lisa Park were fighting on the surface of New Dallas trying to stop devourers that had already landed. Jake could see them on the battle screens, and they looked different from the Marines he remembered. They moved like Vorthak warriors, and they used weapons that hurt them while they fought Dr. Carter was sending reports back to Earth, but his messages were getting shorter and more worried. He wrote that the humans were becoming something new and dangerous. They were winning battles but losing themselves in the process. The joint forces were successful in their attacks. Human planning combined with Vorthak courage was destroying the Devourer fleet, but Jake could see the cost of victory in the faces of his fellow humans. They looked at the destruction around them with the same cold satisfaction that he saw in Vorthak eyes. One of the worst moments came when Jake watched human soldiers use captured Devourer biomatter as ammunition. They fired living tissue into enemy ships where it would eat the vessels from inside. The humans who did this seemed to enjoy watching their enemies die in such a horrible way. The battle lasted for hours, with ships exploding and burning in the darkness of space. Jake saw friends die and enemies destroyed. He felt the same rush of excitement that the Vorthak felt when they killed their foes. This scared him more than any enemy weapon. When the fighting finally ended, New Dallas was saved, but Jake was not sure the victory was worth what it cost. The human Marines who came back from the planet's surface had scars like Vorthak warriors. They talked about killing enemies the way the aliens did, without feeling or regret. Sergeant Brooks had led her Marines in battle, and when she returned, she was different again. She had cuts on her face that she had made herself to mark her kills. When Jake asked her why, she said, "It feels right to mark what you have done in war." The Vorthak were happy with how the humans had fought. Krekstar told Jake that his people had shown they could be real warriors. "You are becoming like us," he said. "Soon you will understand that war is the only truth in the universe." Dr. Carter pulled Jake aside after the battle and showed him his reports. "Look at what we are becoming," he said. "Our people are starting to think like the Vorthak. They care less about saving lives and more about winning battles. They are losing their humanity." Jake looked at the data and saw that Dr. Carter was right. The humans who had fought in the battle were different from the ones who had started the mission. They were harder and colder and more willing to hurt others. They were becoming like their monstrous allies. The victory celebration that night was disturbing to watch. Human soldiers drank with Vorthak warriors and told stories about the enemies they had killed. They laughed about the pain they had caused and seemed proud of the destruction they had created. Jake walked through the ship and listened to conversations between humans and aliens. The humans were adopting Vorthak words and ideas. They talked about honor in battle and the glory of death. They seemed to be forgetting what they had been fighting to protect. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about what Dr. Carter had said about losing their humanity. The alliance with the Vorthak was making humans stronger fighters, but it was also changing who they were as people. He wondered if this was what victory looked like in a war against creatures that ate worlds. Maybe humans had to become monsters to fight monsters. Maybe there was no other way to win against an enemy like the Devourers. But deep in his heart, Jake hoped there might be another path. He hoped that humans could find a way to fight without losing everything that made them different from their alien allies. The question was whether anyone else still believed that was possible. 3 months later, Jake found himself living on a Vorthak ship called the Bloodfang. The ship smelled bad, like chemicals and dead things. The walls were covered in a dark metal that felt warm to touch. Everywhere he went, he could hear the sound of Vorthak warriors sharpening their claws on the metal walls. The human team had come to learn how the Vorthak fought their wars. Captain Hayes had picked the best soldiers from Earth to train with the aliens. Sergeant Kelly Brooks led the human Marines, and she was tough enough to keep up with creatures twice her size. Jake watched the Vorthak train for battle, and what he saw scared him. They would run straight into walls of fire without slowing down. They used their own bodies like weapons, throwing themselves at targets that would kill them. When one warrior fell down dead, the others would step on his body and keep attacking. "They do not think like us," said Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez, who helped Jake with battle plans. "Each warrior thinks he has a bullet and a gun. They do not care about staying alive. They only care about killing the enemy." The Vorthak training was unlike anything humans had ever seen. They would put warriors in rooms full of deadly traps and tell them to reach the other side. Many died during training, but the survivors became better fighters. The aliens thought this was normal and good. Jake tried to understand how creatures could live this way. He watched Krekstar lead training sessions where young warriors learned to ignore pain and fear. They would cut themselves to prove they were brave. They would fight until they could not stand up anymore, Doctor. Ben Carter had come with the human team to study how the Alliance was affecting the soldiers. He was worried about what he saw happening to the humans. Our people are starting to act like the Vorthak, he told Jake. They are becoming more angry and willing to take risks that could get them killed. Jake felt it happening to himself too. Being around the Vorthak made him want to fight harder and care less about danger. There was something exciting about being around creatures who never felt fear. It made him feel stronger and more alive. The human Marines were changing in ways that scared Dr. Carter. They started to talk about enemies the way the Vorthak did. They began to think that showing mercy was weakness. Some of them even started cutting marks on their arms like the aliens did to count their kills. Sergeant Brooks was the first human to complete Vorthak warrior training. She came back from the test covered in scars and with eyes that looked different. When Jake asked her what it was like, she said, "It was like being born again, but into something harder." The Vorthak had weapons that were alive and could think. They gave some of these weapons to the humans to test. The weapons would only work if the person using them felt pain. The more pain they felt, the more powerful the weapon became. This was normal for the Vorthak, but it was hard for humans to understand. Jake learned that the Vorthak came from a world where everything wanted to kill them. Plants could grab and eat creatures that walked by. The ground itself would sometimes open up and swallow things. The Vorthak had survived by becoming the most dangerous things on their planet. Pain makes you strong, Krextar told the human trainees. Fear makes you weak. If you cannot feel pain without crying, then you are not ready for war. The first joint mission came faster than anyone expected. The Devourers had been seen near a human colony called New Dallas. The combined fleet would have to work together to stop them from eating the planet. Jake stood on the bridge of the Bloodfang and watched the Vorthak prepare for battle. They were singing war songs that sounded like screaming. They were sharpening their claws and checking their weapons. Some of them were cutting new scars on their shells to bring them luck. The human soldiers were different now, too. They moved like the Vorthak moved, always ready to fight. They talked about the coming battle like it was something fun instead of something terrible. Jake wondered if this was what they needed to become to win the war, Doctor. Carter sent reports back to Earth about what was happening to the human team. He wrote that the soldiers were becoming more like their alien allies every day. They were losing their fear, but they were also losing their kindness and care for others. The Vorthak showed the humans how to use pain as a weapon against their enemies. They taught them to make sounds that could drive other creatures crazy with fear. They showed them how to use the smell of death to make enemies run away. Jake learned that the Devourers were different from any enemy the humans had ever faced. They were not just trying to take over worlds. They were trying to eat them completely, leaving nothing behind but empty space. This was why the Vorthak fought so hard. There was no surrender against an enemy that wanted to eat everything. The training continued for weeks as both species prepared for the battle that was coming. Human soldiers learned to fight like Vorthak warriors, charging into danger without thinking about safety. They learned to use weapons that hurt them. While they used them, Jake watched his fellow humans change and wondered if they would ever be able to go back to being the people they were before. The alliance with the Vorthak was making them stronger fighters, but it was also making them harder and less caring people. As the fleet moved toward New Dallas, Jake knew that the real test was about to begin. They would finally face the Devourers in battle. He wondered if the humans would be able to fight beside their monstrous allies without becoming monsters themselves. The Vorthak were excited about the coming battle. For them, war was like a festival or celebration. They looked forward to fighting and dying if that was what happened. Jake tried to feel the same way, but part of him still feared death even, though he had learned to hide that fear. The ship moved through space, toward the battle that would show whether humans could learn to fight like monsters while still keeping their humanity. Jake hoped they would be strong enough to win, but not so changed that victory would not matter anymore. Jake Morrison had never seen anything like the creatures standing before him in the meeting room of the UES Horizon. The aliens were 10 feet tall with black shells that looked like armor made from insects. They had 4 arms instead of 2, and each arm ended in claws that could cut through metal. Their faces were like giant bugs with many eyes that reflected the lights in the room. Captain Lisa Hayes stood next to Jake and tried to look calm, but he could see her hands shake a little. The human team had been waiting for this meeting for weeks after the aliens had sent a message to Earth. The message was simple and scary. Join us in war or die when our enemies come for you. The biggest alien stepped forward and spoke through a machine that turned his clicking sounds into words humans could understand. His name was Krextar, and he was the leader of his people called the Vorthak. When he talked, his voice sounded cold and without feeling like a computer. "Your kind fights well, but you are weak and small," Krextar said while looking down at the humans. "We have watched your battles against the pirates in the outer worlds. You have skills we can use. We offer you a place in our great war against the Devourers who eat entire worlds." Dr. Amy Chen, who studied alien life forms, whispered to Jake, "They are warriors who live only for battle. They think dying in a fight is the best way to die. They throw themselves at enemies without caring if they live or die." Jake looked at the scars covering the aliens' bodies. Each mark meant they had killed an enemy. These creatures loved war more than life itself. But something in their many eyes made Jake think they were afraid of something bigger than themselves. The Devourers were the reason for this meeting. They were creatures that ate planets and everything living on them. They had already destroyed 3 solar systems and were moving toward more worlds. Earth had only heard stories about them, but the stories were enough to make everyone afraid. Captain Hayes knew they had no choice. Earth's military was still learning how to fight in space between the stars. They needed help even if it came from creatures that looked like monsters. She stepped forward and spoke to Krextar. "We accept your offer of alliance," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Our people will fight beside yours against the Devourers." Krextar made a sound that might have been laughter. "You will learn our ways of war, human. You will see how real warriors fight. Some of you will die, but that is good. Death in battle brings honor." The meeting continued for hours as they talked about ships and weapons and battle plans. The Vorthak had been fighting the Devourers for many years. They knew how the enemy moved and attacked. They also knew that many worlds had already been lost. Jake learned that the Vorthak came from a planet where life was hard and dangerous. They had to fight other creatures every day just to stay alive. War was not something they learned. It was something they were born to do. They could heal from wounds that would kill humans, and they felt pain differently than people did. Dr. Chen took notes as she studied the aliens. She was fascinated by how different they were from humans. Their bodies were built for fighting with thick shells that could stop bullets. Their claws could tear through steel. Their minds thought only about battle and victory and death. "They have no fear of dying," she told Jake later. "In their culture, fear is the worst thing you can feel. They would rather die than show they are afraid." As the meeting ended, Jake wondered what would happen to humans who had to fight beside these creatures. Would they become more like monsters themselves? Would they lose the things that made them human while learning to be warriors? The Vorthak leader gave the humans a data chip with information about their enemy. The images showed worlds that had been eaten by the Devourers. Where cities and forests once stood, there was nothing but empty space. The creatures that did this were not like anything humans had seen before. "Study this well," Krextar told them. "Soon you will see the Devourers with your own eyes. Then you will understand why we fight the way we do. There is no mercy in war against things that eat worlds." Captain Hayes took the data chip and promised to prepare Earth's forces for what was coming. She knew this alliance would change humanity forever. Fighting beside monsters might turn humans into monsters too. Jake watched the Vorthak leave the meeting room. They moved like predators, always ready to attack. Their claws clicked on the metal floor and their eyes never stopped looking for threats. These would be humanity's allies in the war that was coming. That night, Jake looked out at the stars and wondered which ones still had living worlds around them. The Devourers were somewhere out there moving between the stars and eating everything they found. Soon, humans would have to face them in battle. The alliance with the Vorthak was only the beginning. Human soldiers would have to learn new ways of fighting. They would have to become harder and more willing to kill. The question was whether they could do this without losing what made them human. Dr. Chen finished her report about the Vorthak and sent it to Earth. She wrote that the aliens were the most dangerous creatures she had ever studied. But they were also the only hope humanity had against an enemy that ate worlds. Jake knew that his life was about to change forever. Soon he would be fighting beside creatures that loved war more than life itself. He would have to learn their ways of battle if he wanted to survive what was coming. The war against the Devourers would test everything humans believed about right and wrong. It would show them what they were willing to become to save their worlds. Jake just hoped that when it was over, there would still be something human left to save.